Welcome to the webinar. No matter you are a product manager, program manager, or tech manager, we all face similar challenges. We don't always have all the information up front to plan our roadmap. So that's why we really wanted to go into a little bit more details on how we go about doing that. So a bit of an intro. My name is Becky Flint. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Dragonboat.io, which is actually a tool specifically built for program and portfolio management. And I built this tool based on my experience leading a lot of the product roadmaps for companies of all sizes. Now, we know as the product leaders, all of you program leaders, and our goal is to build the product our customers love. But we also have these either goals or demands around the products have to help us to acquire new customers. The product has to help us retain our existing customers that would allow us to be ahead of our competition. Sometimes we have to build products for news and PR worthies and events, obviously need to be delivered on time, and it's scalable, and it's bug free, and it's responsive to changes. That's a lot of responsibility. But one way or another, the organization looked at us to achieve this, right? On the other side is that we actually don't have a lot of controls on the elements to achieve what we need to achieve. So for number one thing is the demand. We don't really have control on how much demand coming into our way. There's requests from internal teams, regardless it's marketing, it's sales, it's customer success and support. We have feature requests obviously from customers, and we sometimes this is coming to us by our engineering partners that are asking for refactoring. Sometimes that we actually propose that because we realize and we notice our platform is falling apart. We have lots of issues. We should do some refactoring along with the product features and or even ahead of the product feature development. So that's lots of demand coming to us. I'm sure all of us face it every single day, right? We also have a very, very limited control on resources. The engineer resources, the team structure, the different skill sets of the team, the size of the effort, and then obviously we can't control the quality and the scalability. We have an idea of that, but we don't really have control around that. So with this two types of challenges coming together, that really lead us to something called time. So as the product program managers, we are constantly faced by our stakeholders saying, when can I have X? When can I have Y? And we come a plan that kind of communicate to them. Then what happened next is, are we on track? So there's a lot of demand, a lot of needs coming to us on, can we do X, Y, Z? And when can we have X, Y, Z? And the resourcing is something we have to juggle. That's actually stay in another group as well. So the heart of the portfolio program management really is around managing demand within the resources that we have, and being able to articulate and share, communicate the time as we know them, so that we can manage downstream impact. So I'm going to pause for a second. And I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with this concept, but anyone has any comment on things that I overlooked or things that that may or may not be applicable to you?
No. I would say for us, the demand piece really sits with me because there's like 6 different channels that we see requests coming in from, and the type of request could lack certain pieces of information that we need to actually make a decision, like what is the economic impact that what you're asking for will actually create for the company. So that's something that we're trying to, I don't want to say the word limit, but consolidate the number of channels that these requests are coming in from, and create a standard of how we want to receive the information so we can make a decision quicker instead of going back to the requester and asking questions.
Right. Awesome. So the demand management is definitely a part of the portfolio so that you manage the input and then you categorize and then prioritize them based on the impact. Totally, we're going to adjust them. So awesome. Anyone else have a comment or question? No? Okay. So why don't we just go follow along and we can get. So one of the key things is I learned over the years is that program managers and product managers tend to be the face to both sides. You can almost think about there's a business side of the word, and then there's the engineering side of the word, and then we're kind of in the middle, so we do some sort of translation, the connection. But that looking back in time, realize that this setup has its benefit for everyone focused on what they do, but also has a downside if we don't do it well. Meaning that sometimes when people don't have transparency or visibility on either side of the word, then the person in the middle kind of stuck. So what we're trying to do is today with a more responsive organization, with more platforms and system and tooling for us, we can provide context on both sides. And then we can also enforce accountability on both sides so that we're not going to become the person stuck in the middle and then try to make things happen. And being able to really collaborate on both sides and then bring the best together. So what that means is we're taking a portfolio approach to manage demand. So it's never say, is the A more important than B in terms of goals, right? Is it more important to have new customers or it is more important to fix tech debt? They're both important. We cannot say one is more important than the other. It's more of saying, are we going to work on tech debt more in this quarter, or we're going to work on getting new customer more this quarter, depend on the needs of the business as it is today, or we'll foresee in the next quarter. So the portfolio approach is very important to manage demand. The second part of that is about how we are going to do planning and our resource. We don't do waterfall anymore. Waterfall really never really works because nobody can plan so perfectly, precisely, a year advance or a quarter in advance. So the way we have to manage our roadmaps is to use the iterative planning, and that will give us the ability to have a better understanding of resourcing and a better understanding of the estimation, and give us a sort of we can call it a fuzzy timeline, if you will. And then will help all of us to focus on things more important now, but still having ability to look further so then we can do iterative planning 1 month and then 1 quarter at a time. So we're going to talk a little bit more about iterative planning, how we're going to go about this. And the third one is a dynamic progress update. Will give us a better indication of the ship time. Now, a lot of times there's a huge debate say, hey, we're Agile, we don't have a ship time. On the other hand, there's a need for ship time. The reason we need a ship time is not say, hey, you committed for XYZ date. Why didn't you achieve that? Obviously, that's something we can have a discussion on that. But the main reason we want a ship time is because the product doesn't go to market when we release the code. There's always downstream impact in terms of marketing and email communication, sales enablement, training, support, and all the others. If you have partners, you also need to give them a heads up, which means that all our stakeholders, quote unquote, on the business side, need to know what is coming so then they can plan and work what they need to work to take the whole product to the market. Therefore, having an understanding of when certain features are going to be available is very important, not just to hit a date, but more importantly, it's for our downstream stakeholders to know what to do. And that's really important for us to have ability for them to see what's going on. So I'm sure that's main reasons of what program management come into place is really trying to align these three things. So I'm going to start each one of them. And the first one is talking about a portfolio management. So before we talk about portfolio management, let's just talk a little bit of the principle of product management. And this is something, so David Sachs is the first CEO of PayPal. And later on, he founded Yammer. And then now Yammer obviously sold it to Microsoft, this very, very successful company. And now he's the VP of Kraft. venture. So he said something called rock, pebble, sand product management, and that's something actually very much relevant to program management as well. What it means is that we only look at the big rocks because these are foundational, really leads to what will move the needles. And the pebbles and sands are things like stories and tasks and bugs. These are things that we can't really plan ahead. They just come and we fill them up. What we focus is really the bigger ones, the bigger rocks that will move the needle. And so for some of you running program management or being the PMO team, but you don't have a lot of resources, and this is really important. I have a lot of people coming ask me, say, hey, we're building a PMO team. We have lots and lots of programs, and I don't have enough program manager resources. How do I decide to allocate my program managers? Should I go ask for budget or headcount? The question is, the answer is actually not. So same thing of where we allocate our resources to everything else. We allocate resources also to, from program management perspective, also to things more important, more complex. And this is the model we use at PayPal, and we use in a lot of other companies. The goal is for us to look at the rocks first. Put the rocks in, and if the rocks require cross-function team collaborations, if the rocks needs program management resources, we will focus on them first. Everything else just fall into the place with a better process and better streamlined and standard understanding of how work can be done. Question? Anything? Anyone? Okay, so now let's go to the heart of the program management now, or portfolio management in that sense. So what this one does is to say, deciding on the construct of portfolio. So almost every single company has the similar, if not the same, set of the objectives, right? More or less. You're going to grow customers. You're going to keep your existing customer. You're going to have, address your tech debt. You will have more product innovation, so you will ahead of competitors. And then sometimes you have to build things that drive PRs, and you have to drive things to make you more efficient, etc. So these are different buckets of, you can call it a theme or whatnot. Now, what is different, and that's something that will help a portfolio to be successful, is to first align with your key stakeholders, say, what size of each of the jars, if you will, how big each of these categories we want to invest in the coming, let's say, quarter. So that, Robert, to your point, and you mentioned earlier about you have, 5, 6 channels of requests come in, and then we want to prioritize them, we want to consolidate them, and then we do need to have a framework to say, one is how they bucketize into different categories of business outcome, and then secondly, how is each one of them contribute to this business outcome. With these 2 factors will help us to prioritize most of our features much, much better than the traditional way of, say, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of sequential prioritization. I think this is really important. A lot of us here using Jira, you are very familiar with the rank, right? So you drag something up and down the rank, and then so that's like you work on the first one, you work on the second one, and that is okay in terms of working on tasks. But when it comes to the time you actually run a portfolio, it's very hard to say, is it more important to do tech debt feature 1 or to do the user acquisition feature 2? These are apples to orange comparisons. What we really should do is to say, within the tech debt, A, B, C, D, and then within the user acquisition, X, Y, Z, and then you compare their relative contribution to these goals. And then you would say, okay, we agree to, investing 20% in tech debt, 50% in acquisition. So then you can basically have a budget in terms of resources and allocate it to each of the jars, and then you can prioritize within each of the jars. So that would actually make a lot more sense, and it's a more apple-to-apple comparison versus compare 2 things that are almost hard to decide. All good? You guys are quiet. All right. So we talk about different jars, which is the construct of your portfolio. Your portfolio actually has multiple dimensions. Most of us think about the OKRs and themes. You also think about your portfolio as your teams. You have multiple teams. So then in the sum of the organization, take a model, you can call it a Spotify model, you can call it mobility or internal mobility model, where you could move teams between different initiatives. That also gave you ability to think about your portfolio allocation in a way that's not static, right? So, so what we will do is when you have your items on your roadmap, what do you do first is to visualize your roadmap. You can drag some sort of the Gantt chart and timeline, and then you teacher size your each one of the features. And then you can see at that time your allocation by different drivers. Now, this is something sometimes is very controversial because people still have the mind at the portfolio level, think about a waterfall era. So a lot of people say, well, the teacher sizing is not accurate. We don't have the details. We have to break down the stories so that I can tell you what the precise estimate is. And I would say that's step 2. In most of the portfolio management, when you've done it right, you always do the top-down, high-level understanding of the teacher for your features. And this is not saying you're on the hook to deliver a feature at that teacher sizing. It's more of saying understanding your product team's velocity. So, and many of you familiar with the Scrum. So you have a Scrum team, so you have points. So you over time what's your team's velocity, how many points you can deliver. So, but that's never like in day one, right? The point of the reason of having points at a Scrum team level is just to understand what teams can accomplish over time. Same thing for teacher sizing. It's at a one level higher, it's at your portfolio level to understand as a product and a tech lead to understand if this is something we want to achieve, to see how we are going to achieve that. That's approximate size of effort it will take. So that over time, your product and a tech lead in your own pod can be pretty good at estimating how big it's a certain feature. So it helps you to do a very high level roadmap upfront without going down the path of breaking down the stories and stuff. The breakdown stories is the second iteration of the roadmap. And we will touch upon that a little bit as well. So that's called a bottoms up. Top down is something like this. I have feature X, Y, Z, and we'll talk about the feature verbally or, maybe have a PowerPoint deck of whatnot, it's a very high level wireframes with your tech lead, between product and tech lead, to say, this is what we're trying to do and how big is the effort. Tech lead will say 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 16 weeks, whatnot. And that will give you a general idea of how big it is. And then you can decide then to say, we have this much resources. These are many things we need to do. Should we do this or not based on the benefits and outcome, right? And the exercise that not only you come with a very high level iteration of the roadmap with a little bit of understanding of benefits, with a little bit of understanding of the resources. Remember, these are the 2 challenges we have in our portfolio. It also helps the product managers and designers that all these we kind of pre-eng work and plan out so they can do their part to make the feature ready so that they're not going to just go off to do everything, right? So have to prioritize for their time first. So I'm going to pause here for a second. Any questions?
Yes. So the teacher sizing, we are talking about ideas, right?
Right.
And do we have a designated field for this one?
Yes.
Okay.
You can actually use that. You can use effort field. I'm going to go into a demo pretty much right after this. I'm going to do a quick demo on Dragonboat. So here, for some of you already familiar with the Dragonboat, you probably know this is a place where you go to forecast, and then it's a forecast list. For those of you who are not familiar with the Dragonboat, just a quick overview. So Dragonboat is a product that I started which is for portfolio program management. It is a product integrated with the tools such as Jira and GitHub and others. For those are the Agile team tools. The idea is that Dragonboat integrate with the Agile team so that you can do portfolio and the program level, the planning and the tracking with a bigger picture, where the team use Jiras and GitHubs and other tools, Pivotal, to manage their day-to-day Agile and sprint as task activity. So when you put these two things together, you have the strategic and the portfolio activity in one tool, and the team and the Agile execution in another tool, but they're integrated just like how we work, right? And so with that context, I'm going to here show you how in the forecast feature, where you can see I already put in some of the ideas or features. And in here, you can see these other features. Now I group them by OKRs, that's objective 1, 2, 3. And they are very high level target the quarter. Now, I'm going through step by step. Whenever we have a list of ideas that we want to work on, first we're gonna group them by various things that are important to us. We can group them by OKRs. We can group them by strategic themes, etc., depending on your company's preference. In this case, let's use the OKR, for example. And then we'll also group them to say, I want to work on these guys in Q3. But that's just a want, right? We don't know we can do it in Q3 yet. So we will group them here. So you can see there's a Q3 and there's a Q4. And you can see these are different objectives. I have pre-filled some of the data. You can see these are the efforts. These are efforts like a teacher size. They're in the currency of weeks. So it could be something like 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 20 weeks, 16 weeks, or whatnot. So that you can have a general idea of how much effort that would take. That will be also the baseline for your resources. As you can see here, I add something called the business value. Again, this depends on whether your company wants to use this method or not. You don't have to, but we recommend it because it's very hard to say what is the benefit to work on feature ABC. So the goal is in here, we tie each of the feature to objectives, and then we will say from a 0 to 100. So the recommendation is to use it from a 0 to 100. How much this feature is going to contribute to this to achieve this objective. Let's say our objective 3 is about retention. We'll improve our retention from 85% to 90%. Let's say that. So then we'll say if we would work on this feature, we can help achieve this 30%. So if we do 3 of the feature or 4 feature like this, we can achieve our retention goals. In most cases, one feature probably contribute part of the goals. If we can achieve 100% of the goals, great. But chances are it's not likely. So you start to have these kind of like benefit value, right? So you have a benefit, and then you have an effort, which is kind of like a teacher sizing. It gives you some understanding of the benefit and the cost analysis. It also gives you some understanding at the quarterly level, do we have enough resources? Because overall add up to here, it's a 40 weeks. Maybe we have 40 weeks, maybe we don't. So that's something that gives us at least a general understanding. You can see Q3 or Q4 relatively evenly distributed. So it's a good starting point. So I'm gonna pause here for a second. Any questions?
So it's an idea, and I thought, so once you export it to Jira, does it conflict with the story point?
Very good point. So the Jira part is called a bottoms-up planning. And I would show you what happens between the top-down planning, which is your dev lead, tech lead's high-level estimate. And in Jira, you will have a bottoms-up planning effort. So that you roll up the stories may be different. And that's really shown here. I would probably just jump ahead a little bit. So what we just did is to have, I'm going to remove this. And earlier on the other screen, we grouped by quarter and a time and objective. So let's do the same. So here is what we did in terms of the effort, right? So the effort will show us the length of the story, the length of the ideas. And what happens in Jira now is we can pull information out of Jira and show us what Jira has predicted. And in this case, you can see we have a bit of problem, and that's why it's red. It's telling you that even though we planned this much time, in Jira, it's longer than that. So if we want to see what it is, I can turn on the Jira icon. I can see these are my planned date, right? And this is what Jira has in the scope of this epic. And you can see the predicted day is later than our current target. So as a program manager today, we go through multiple iterations of planning. First level planning is we have a list of things that we want to do. We prioritize them. We have a teacher sizing. And the second part of the planning is to say, okay, now we have a teacher sizing, and maybe we have some dependencies. So we need to see how the roadmap fit together, right? So that's basically what we did earlier, which is how roadmap are coming together. So what it gave us is not something say, hey, this is something we can, for sure, we know we're going to hit, right? It's like a first baseline. The first baseline will then go to Jira so that your team can start break down the story, started to execute. As your team start break down the story, start to execute, and we in program management do need to track, are we on track? Are we behind? It's very hard to track on these things. So for us, you can actually track on those things right here. It shows you exactly feature by feature, because your stakeholders don't really care about your sprint burn downs, right? What they care about is, when would this feature make it the date that you mentioned it to us earlier? As you connect it to Jira, you can see that the timeline is different from what you planned. So we have two choices. One is to move things around in Jira just so that this one can make it on time. The second one is, we can't change it anymore. Our teams, it's a full. They have all the things we need to work on. Therefore, we need to change our delivery date, right? So we can update the date and inform our stakeholders, right? So that if I were to do something like here, you can check on predict end date, which is what's coming from Jira, for example. I think most of you are using Jira here. And then also we can check on planned end date. That's what we planned earlier. So you can see the dates that are different. So then you can manage your basically stakeholder management and the progress tracking.
And aggregate the story points.
Yes.
Can we?
This can be a story point as well. So you can decide whether you use the story points or you use time tracking or use issue. So you can decide what it is, and you can actually see the story points of your stories and how they add up.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
So if we use the same parameters, the same measurement as the story points in the estimation, you can get a very good estimation tool between the effort and actual story points.
Yeah. So today, estimation are in the weeks. We're in the process of building a feature so that you can estimate by story points, and then we convert it to weeks. Because in the end, this time is reflected by time. So one way or another, we have to reflect any sizing into a time so you can show it on a Gantt chart. But yes. So the goal is to have a plan, and then you have a progress, a prediction.
Actual.
Yeah.
So basically, when we estimate the effort in the roadmap, and we do it by idea and quarter objective idea in the forecast. So here we can use the same measurement tool as story points. You see what I mean?
Right.
You can say it should take us 10 story points.
Yeah.
And later on, when we go to the actual quarter and actually have the Scrum team take the commitment and allocate story points in the Jira and use this manage feature here, you can see that it was 14, and in the other screen, later on it will be on the same screen, I'm sure, you just mentioned it was 10, so we can do a very good learning for the next project.
Right. Right. Yes. So this is exactly right in that you do a top-down planning. Today we do only weeks. We will build things like story points. And then that will give you a same measurement when you do a bottoms up. So bottoms up will add up all the stories. Top down is the budget story, right? So you can see the two things progressing and then how they coming together or stay apart, so you can manage stakeholder communication expectations by seeing them easily in one place. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back to here for a second. One of the things that we didn't do, I think a lot of you probably facing that challenge, is the prioritization. So assuming we have all the ideas in, we had, we already had the scoring and the sizing. What if we don't have enough resources? This happens every day, right? So obviously you can prioritize based on the benefit and effort. The other part is really the portfolio concept, which is allocation. The most important things about the portfolio concept is how do we track our actual work against our allocation? Because quite often what happens is that people start to have goals. You have your OKRs, you have all the other nice, fancy strategic focus and whatnot, and then you start to prioritize your roadmap. And these two things never connect together. Right? Maybe you tie your objectives under your features, but they're still not tied together in terms of how our resources are deployed. And in the end, your strategy will never become a strategy if there's no resource behind it, right? So this one will give you a real-time view on your efforts and allocate to different objectives. So in this example, what you can see is that your objective number one, presumably it's the most important things you're supposed to do, actually has the least amount of the allocation, which may or may not be right, but at least to give you ability to take a look at that and decide, is this something that we should work this way? And that really comes in handy when you try to prioritize competing product features within different categories. Right, so let's using this example. In this example, let's say we have in this example, there's a 54 weeks of total effort required. We don't have 54 weeks. We only have, let's say, 40 weeks. So what do? Based on the allocation we have here, we know that the objective 2 and 3 are taking a lot more allocation. So objective number 3 may give up some of the resources to help with objective number 1. So that we need to do, for example, in this case, we'll move one of the objective number 2 features to the next quarter. Right. So if we move this to the next quarter, let's see, I'm going to drag this to the next quarter. Number 3. So now we have a different allocation. We have enough resources to work on in this quarter. So the allocation is a very useful tool to help us to manage demands. And a lot of times, program product managers are stuck in the middle where everyone comes, not scream at you, but come at you to pressure you to do A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. And using a portfolio allocation way can help you provide a context and help you to prioritize effectively with the data, so that we're not going to be the person that have a lot of emotional things associated into why X is it's more important than Y, etc. Cool. All right. So we've gone through a little bit of the demo. I'm going back to our presentation. So if we were to say, how do we build our first iteration of the roadmap, is that you would import either copy and paste or import from Jira and whatnot to get your ideas into Dragonboat. And then you group them by strategic drivers, for example, your objectives. You can visualize on the timeline what they look like based on the teacher size, right? And then you can juggle allocations based on what we saw earlier when you over allocated one area versus the other. So you can juggle this kind of allocation. Now, after you've done that, you can see when your different initiatives going to fall into, because the quarter doesn't really necessarily line up with the timeline, right? So as you see the Gantt chart, see the timeline, you can juggle the quarter now. At that time is when you are ready to communicate with your stakeholders, because before that it's too early. And you don't want to wait too much after the story points and breakdown either, because that's a little too late. So this is the time you communicate with your stakeholders, and you don't have to communicate with them everything. You can just highlight the big rocks, and the context you provide is to say, here's our roadmap, and here's how they align to our strategic initiatives, and we have a high-level understanding of resourcing. Things may change, but this is what we have as the first iteration. So allow us to create something with the minimal amount of information. Question? All right, so go to the next one. Now, that's not the end of the word, right? So I always say program managers play two roles. You are, in one hand, you work with the engineering team and with your Scrum team, sometimes not on a day-to-day basis, but kind of keep an eye on that. But the most part is you focus on the strategic part of the work, which is the quarterly alignment we just did. And that's not the end of it, right? So we will do bi-weekly or weekly check-in, depending on your company's operating process. And then we also provide a monthly stakeholder updates. And that information is based on the planned and the predicted timeline. So you have a pretty general understanding of here's what we planned, are we on track or not, if we need to change some of our prediction. So you can almost draw an analogy of how you do Scrum. In Scrum, you do 2 weeks grooming, right? Sprint planning. In here, you do quarterly alignment. In Scrum, you do daily stand-up with your team. In strategic cycle, you do weekly check-in with your stakeholder, with your peers, and also with your Scrum team leads, Scrum masters. And then in the Scrum, you do 2-week sprint demo or whatnot, so they give your stakeholders a general idea what it is. In here, you do a monthly stakeholders update, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, depending on how your team works. But this is basically your cadence at a higher level, portfolio level. We didn't talk about a feature request and trade-off. It's a bigger conversation we can discuss in a different time. But the idea is it's almost like go through a mini planning again, basically add new things and see what the implication to our roadmap. Question? All right. So I am going to do a quick demo on stakeholder update. I think most of you have probably seen this, but if not, they're here. So we provide a lot of PowerPoints, sadly, and the goal is to remove as much as possible so everyone has the source of truth to understand. In today's world, when we distribute it, we have a different time zones. This is even more important. So this one, for example, gives us the ability to say, here's different product areas. Here's the quarter. And here we're grouping all our initiatives or features in a way that's by objective. So this is something that in most cases, for example, your customer success team, your sales team are kind of interested in, because they want to know. I'm going to expand all of that. They want to know what is going to be available when, because they need to interact with the external stakeholders, right? Customers and resellers, etc. Now, we could also switch this around a little bit. So we can build this based on, for example, our roadmap. So this is a view where most likely your executives are interested in. So they want to know what are the objectives that we have and what each of the teams are working on these objectives. Actually, let me undo this so we don't have that. Okay. So you can almost look like in this way, right? So if your executives or your board, etc., they want to know what are your key objectives and what are the different teams working on which features and when things going to be available. Again, this is something that you can slice and dice, share with your stakeholders so everyone's going to be on the same page. It's super important to keep everyone on the same page so that the context and accountability come into play, and the program product managers no longer be the ones sort of stuck in the middle. All right, so I think we're coming time. The key takeaway from today is that the planning has it's iterative. Portfolio planning is iterative. You start with the top down, and then you do a bottom up, so things coming together, and then you make adjustments. And when and how to share your product and the roadmaps and the update is to make sure you have done some high-level planning and alignment in terms of the buckets of strategic drivers, your high-level teacher sizing, so you know you can be done. So there's no unnecessary excitement when things quote-unquote delayed, even though we never really communicate to that. And then also how we communicate dates in terms of bigger time frame, right? Talk about a quarters and months, not necessarily on a date. So finally, is to have a source to choose to keep your teams aligned and informed on what's going on. There you go. All the responsibility without control until you have something to keep everyone aligned and controlled. So I'm going to pause here. We have a couple minutes. Any questions?
So in one sentence, it's not clear to me the difference between forecast and manage in the Dragonboat.
So a very good question. We actually are combining forecast and manage into one. So the difference between forecast is it has a resource prediction. It will show you the resource here. And we are in the process of combining tool, and so that you will have just one screen where you can decide to show or not show the resources panel.
Good. I was quite confused last week by this situation.
Right. So they are very similar. The main difference is the resource panel. So in a managed way, you can primarily to track the progress, and then forecast is mostly in forecast resourcing and dependencies. Now, I understand there's a lot of similarities. So based on a lot of customers' feedback, we're combining the two into one. And then you have the option of showing this panel or not. Any other questions?
Nope. I just have to say I like how this kind of brings together that view of like resources compared to quarterly priorities, and then just that reinforcement of using it as like the tool to kind of gauge where we're at. Should we move something? Should we pivot something? I think that's really the key thing that I haven't seen in any of the tools that my companies are atypically used to using, which really gets hard, and I think why we haven't been able to move the needles on really doing portfolio management at its best, to be able to say we need to pivot and move away from here and move resources into this. Yeah, I really appreciate that aspect about it for sure.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dorothy. Yeah. Any other questions, anyone? So I want to ask you guys a question. I am in the process of planning a responsive portfolio management training, and somewhere down the road we can expand it to a full-on certification. I think there's a lot of program managers today actually doing portfolio management role. A lot less. I mean, 5-10 years ago, they're more focused on the Scrum, and today a lot of the program managers really up-level your role to be strategic and needle moving for the company. Portfolio management, on the other hand, wasn't really a very well understood, and let alone being trained. There's certified Scrum Master, but there's never anything around portfolio management in the context of Agile and outcome-driven OKR. So we're thinking about providing a training, free training for for people interested, maybe we do a 2-hour training. You can do have a little like intro certificate, level 1 type of thing. Are you guys interested?
Yeah, I'd be interested.
I would be interested, Becky.
Awesome.
Jean.
Hi, Jean. That's great. We make it free, so you don't have to pay anything. But I think the goal is like, I think there's a very well understood Agile process in the Scrum. But many of us actually doing portfolio management is nothing about that. So I'm really interested just to work with everyone and have this well understood. And I'm glad that you're interested. Any question from anyone else? All right, we are actually coming on time. So if you have any question, ping me. I'm Becky at Dragonboat.io. I'm also on LinkedIn, Becky Flint. So would love to continue the conversation. If there are any topics you think that can be helpful, let me know so we can have more of these in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
I think it was
Thank
very
you very
useful.
much. Thanks. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye. Bye, everyone.